Well, hello and welcome again to BBC News. Welcome to viewers across the UK and around the world. As we continue our coverage here and look at these images from inside Westminster Hall in the heart of London, as Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II is now lying in state in this hall where she will remain until the morning of her funeral on Monday. And just in the last 15 minutes, the doors have opened to members of the public. And so what we are seeing now is those people who were at the front of the queue, some of them who'd been queuing for several days, potentially, to be among the first members of the public to pay their respects at the start of 4 days of lying in state. And we'll stay with these images as we watch them a little. If you follow them, it is incredibly moving to watch and just to think about why each individual person has chosen to be there, has wanted to be there. And very, very touching at the beginning, shortly after 5 o'clock when the doors first opened and we saw the first men and women come through. And the number of people who stood silent, obviously, but the number of people who just did a gentle bow, several people who put their hands together in a bow, almost to say thank you, and a substantial number of people in tears. And we wonder what goes through anyone's mind as they stand there. Who are they thinking of? Who are they remembering? Perhaps thinking of loved ones that they have lost. And over the course of the next hour, we will be talking to many of the people who are still queuing, many of them who have a very, very long wait ahead to say farewell to Her Majesty the Queen. We reached this moment, of course, after a procession from Buckingham Palace through to Westminster Hall. Thousands of people lining the Mall, as we have seen in the last few days, as the Queen's coffin was brought on a gun carriage to where it is now at Westminster Hall. And our diplomatic correspondent, James Landale, watched that procession. As we might expect, James, carried out with absolute precision, something that the military had rehearsed for, prepared for, but still extremely moving because the Queen's very closest family members were behind the gun carriage. You were watching it all. Give us a sense of what you watched over the last few hours.
I think you can watch these things from time to time. You can see the ceremonial, and yet it never fails to move. And what struck me today when I was watching it, I had a particularly lucky vantage point from part of Westminster and Parliament, so I could see everything as it arrived in. And what it struck me is that it's one thing to watch all the events of the last week or so, as most of us have. It's another thing to actually see it in person. And you could see, talking to people and looking in the crowds, that the importance of being there in person is that that's the moment almost when the penny drops. I was at St James's Palace on Saturday morning, and I was just talking to some of the members of the Privy Council who had been inside at that accession council when the death of the monarch was formally proclaimed and the new monarch was proclaimed too, that for them, that was their moment when the penny dropped, when you actually heard somebody stand up and say, "God save the King." That, I think, is the reason why we're seeing so many people here today lining the streets, so many people in the queues, as we're seeing just passing, is for them, being in person gives it a reality.
James, you'll stay with us for our coverage, but let's go to that queue. We are told the queue is currently 2.8 miles long. That is the official distance that we are given at the moment. Let's cross to my colleague, Geeta Gurumurthy, because Geeta, you are chatting, I can see, to people who are queuing. Over to you.
Jane, thanks very much indeed. We are, in fact, in Victoria Tower Gardens, and I'm joined by Nikki and Marisa. Thank you so much for being with us. Just tell us, when did you get here? Because we're right at the front of the queue now, aren't we?
Yeah, so got here at about 8 o'clock this morning. Yeah.
And how's it been?
It's been absolutely fine. We've met some lovely, lovely people. We've had like quite a nice, day with them, sharing snacks, watching the procession, wasn't it?
Telling stories and just kind of, and the sunshine, luckily it hasn't rained, so it's kind of lifted everyone's spirits even more.
Everyone I've spoken to came in at about 8ish, 7:38. And why did you want to be here?
I've grown up with the Queen, and I just felt that she served us, her country, and I just felt that we needed to serve her, and it was just something I needed to do and I wanted to do. So I asked my daughter to come with me.
And you are about to go in. You very kindly paused to talk to us, so thank you, because you've been here a long time. How are you feeling now that you're literally just at the front of the entrance?
A bit anxious, actually. It's kind of setting in that it's all a bit real, and it's now kind of it's the closure of it, really. My heart's probably going 10 to a dozen. But yeah, I'm glad.
I think it'll be emotional, and it's I think it's going to be the quietness that is going to be more powerful than anything else. Do you know what I mean? I just think it's just going to be
very surreal.
but a lovely thing to do. I wanted to come, and I'm here, and I would have waited all night. But we're going to get through.
And just finally, how do you feel about King Charles? Do you think, from what we've seen in the last week, the nation's ready to move on?
Yeah, I think so. I've kind of felt really sorry for him to obviously be in the public eye and still trying to grieve. I think that he's got a big pair of shoes to fill, but I think he'll be absolutely fine.
Okay, we will let you go in.
Thank you
so much for being with us, and it's really kind of you to wait, and we hope that you were able to pay your respects peacefully. Thank you
very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, this queue, as you can see, is moving. What's happened is that we are right at the front here. People will go around, and we're going to be seeing them going into the Blackboard Garden, which is in the House of Lords end of the Palace of Westminster. But actually, where the Queen has been lying in state is the other side of the building. So everyone goes through airport security. I think there's about 8 lanes of airport security. All their bags are checked. There's no food and drinks. There's lots of stipulations if you are coming down here about what you can and can't bring. Small bags. I think they're told to turn their phones off when they're getting nearer to the actual room in Westminster Hall. And we know that this park, which you can see, is holding a good number of people already. There's a lot of people in the zigzag lines just over there. This park can hold about 8,000 people, and once you're in the zigzags, I'm told that it's about 3 hours from the back of that to the entrance. As I said, a lot of people I spoke to who were at the front of the queue here about 20 minutes ago had joined at about 7:30, 8 o'clock this morning, and they were all very pleased to have done so, and have all had a good day. If we just walk along the line, we'll see if we can speak to some more people perhaps who have joined the queue. As you can see, there's all sorts of ages, and we know that people have come from all parts of the country. Hello, excuse me, are you able to talk to us just from BBC News about why you've come today?
Would you like to, Emily? Yes, please.
Can you come a bit nearer to the microphone for us? What's your name?
Emily.
And how old are you?
I'm 9.
And why did you want to come today?
I wanted to come because to pay my respect to the Queen.
And where do you live?
I live in Farley Green. That is it's.
Is it in London?
No. Guildford.
Guildford, okay. And have you been queuing a long time?
Yes. Before we started moving, we'd been waiting 6 hours.
6 hours, well, and I can see you've got a rucksack on your back.
Yeah.
And you've had some water and you've had some food?
Yeah.
And how are you feeling now that you are very near the front of the
I feel rather excited.
Do you?
And happy that we managed to make it through.
What does the Queen mean to you? Why did you want to come?
I wanted to come because she's been the Queen my whole life, and when she died I was very sad.
Why were you sad?
Because she had been done great things over her 70 years.
And have you seen her son, Charles? Do you like him? Do you think he'll be a good king?
Yes.
You do. Why do you think he'll be a good king?
Because I think that he's I think it looks as if he's gained his mother's wisdom from how he's watched his mother and gained it.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, and I hope you are able to pay your respects very soon. You're very close to the front. Well done for making it all this way today. Thank you very much indeed. So as you can see, there are people of all ages, all backgrounds. We've spoken to people from various different parts of the country. We'll be back with you in the coming hours.
Oh, lovely. Thank you so much, Geeta. Well, yes, much more from you to come. And a little later on, we will be in a rather different part of the queue, rather further down, with people who have still some way to wait. The queue very nearly 3 hours long, as we say. 3 miles long, I'm so sorry. 3 miles. Crucial distinction at the moment. My colleague James Landale is still with me, our diplomatic correspondent, because you were watching all today's proceedings. But it was so interesting. In fact, the First Lady that Geeta spoke to, exactly to your point, she effectively said, goodness, this has become real for me now. That was part of your reflection of what we were witnessing today.
Yeah, because I think for many people, it's very hard to take in what's happened. You know, the news of the Queen's death happens and people absorb it. But does it sink in? How far does it? And I think that there comes a moment when it just actually, this means the scale of the change that we're going through is something that we're all experiencing together. And you're seeing it in the way that the ceremonial has been organised for this week. It's amazing how much has involved the public. You know, I think people have been amazed how much has been televised, how much the new king has been going around the country. A lot more has been public than, you know, would have been, you know, 70 years ago. And I think that's all part of a process of trying to take people on a journey. There's a clear, if you talk to officials within palace and government, that's what they're trying to do here. They're trying to bring people together to try and bring that as much support, because they know this is a crucial moment for, you know, the UK. They know it's a crucial moment for the royal family, and that's why so much has been planned to make sure this is as accessible as possible. And that's why we're seeing what we're seeing today, and the sheer scale of the queues.
Yes. James, you're staying with us, I know. And it's very moving, isn't it, to just look at these images from inside Westminster Hall. I'm just so struck. I mean, people in tears, perhaps we shouldn't be surprised by that when we see it, but the number of people just giving a little nod, a little bow, with their own thoughts, the quiet, the silence of Westminster Hall, that in itself, I think, really very moving indeed. Let's talk to a few more people who will be hoping to do exactly that in quite a few hours from now, I have to say, because we're going to head rather further down the queue than where Geeta was. Let's cross to our correspondent, Angus Crawford, because Angus, explain for us where you are. I can see the river behind you, and what that means for the people who are around you. How far off are they from being able to pay their final respects?
Well, the truth is many, many hours. If you know London's South Bank, I'm standing just outside the Royal Festival Hall, so I can see Westminster, but the queue you've been talking about snakes out of Victoria Tower Gardens, over Lambeth Bridge, along the Albert Embankment. It then breaks for the road for Westminster Bridge. It starts again behind County Hall. It snakes along there, past the London Eye, which many of our viewers may know, past the National Theatre behind me, carries along there, under the bridge, and then past Tate Modern, then past Shakespeare's Globe, then past London Bridge. It's now, I believe, parallel with the Tower of London, very nearly at Tower Bridge, as you say, very close to 3 miles. But that, I think, is just the start. The authorities say they're preparing for a maximum queue length of 10 miles. So after Tower Bridge, it will snake south into Southwark Park, and in that park alone, there are something like 3 miles of zigzag queuing for many more people there. The truth is, if you wish to be in the queue and get to the front and do what you wish to do and pay your respects, you're going to have to steel yourself for a very long wait. And the authorities are saying, come light, travel light, bring only one bag with you, just the things you need really to spend the couple of hours you are here. The queue will move, and it will move quickly, so you won't be able to sit down or put up a tent. And when you get to Victoria Tower Gardens, you will find there's airport-style security. So don't take anything with you that you wouldn't take on a plane, for example. Phones, do keep them on silent. There's also a request that people wear sombre clothing and they remain silent within Westminster Hall while they're paying their respects. But these people behind me, this queue hasn't moved in the last half hour that I've seen, and it seems that they're moving people along in batches. What you may just be able to see is that all of them on one of their wrists are wearing a little yellow wristband. Now that's going to be crucial. We love our queuing in the UK, but we like fair queuing. Now this is going to ensure it. As you arrive in the queue, you can then be given a wristband that will have a number on it, and that means you can't be queue jumped, as it were. And for those who are coming to London, it's going to be very, very busy, so plan early, pack sensibly, but also look at the online map, which is live at the moment, which the Department of Culture, Media and Sport has put up, which will indicate where the end of the queue is. So you want to go to that end, not get off in the middle of London and head towards, for example, Charing Cross, because you simply won't be able to join here.
Angus, thank you very much for now. You may well have brought us the phrase of the day, fair queuing. Hashtag fair queuing. I can see that developing. Before we talk to our next guest about everything we've been witnessing today, just if you are thinking you want to do exactly what all these people are doing right now, paying their respects through Westminster Hall, I would actually just flag what is probably a very, very useful article on the BBC website if you want to look for it, because it has a really useful map. It's quite hard to keep all these street names and variations in your head, and you may well, of course, not know London, and it's quite hard to get your head around of this. There's a really useful map, I think. The article is called Queen's Lying in State, What to Know Before You Join the Queue. You just think that map in particular might be really handy. And there's lots of information about what you can and can't do, places that might be open where you can get a coffee and so on. So that is very useful, I think. And also the DCMS is keen to point out, the Department for Culture, Media and Sport is keen to point out that it is periodically updating its Twitter feed to explain, well, exactly that. There you see it. The queue is currently approximately 2.9 miles long. Approximately 2.9. But it is going to keep updating that over the course of the 4 days. That's what they're telling us. So that's really useful as well, just to explain, particularly if you don't know the capital, particularly to explain where to go, where the end of the queue is at the time of writing. So that's a useful Twitter feed to keep hold of as well. So that's all there. Really, really useful information if you're hoping to head down there and pay your respects. Lying in state, the Queen's lying in state for 4 days, and the queue, again, worth reminding you, I think the queue is running 24 hours a day. So you might find yourself queuing overnight, and please, lots of advice about please take warm clothing for that sort of eventuality. But there is lots and lots of information, and it is being updated all the time. And we'll stay with some of those really very moving images from inside Westminster Hall and talk to Lieutenant General James Bashall, who is National President of the Royal British Legion. Thank you so much for joining us today, sir. And in your role, I think you met the Queen a number of times. So, of course, I do want to ask you, first of all, just for your personal remembrances, what your thoughts have been over the last few days.
I think like most people, I've been hugely saddened when I first heard the news, and reflective on all that the Queen has been to all of us throughout our lives, but also grateful for particularly her support and her work for the Royal British Legion. And it was my huge privilege as the President to be able to host her on several occasions when she came to visit veterans, and when she particularly came to the Royal Albert Hall for the Festival of Remembrance, and at various important occasions, remembrance occasions. And she has been and was the most wonderful and kind-hearted and supportive patron that we were fortunate to have for 70 years.
And I would assume, given her deep knowledge of the armed forces and her love for the armed forces, that she was hugely knowledgeable as well.
She was, I think everyone would recognise how knowledgeable she was. She knew and she understood the military. I mean, she knew all our ranks. She could correct people sometimes. Well, certainly Prince Philip did on dress. But she certainly had a very good eye for detail, and was always very well briefed and had a great affinity for veterans across all the generations.
Yes, and that's interesting you say that, because I've been really struck today the number of members of the forces who've been involved in this beautifully carried out procession that we saw at 2 o'clock this afternoon, and we've heard from a number of people involved in that and the preparations of various ages, and they were, some of them really genuinely very moved, and they said she was our boss, and they took that very seriously, it seemed to me, in the way that the Queen took that very seriously.
And I think we all did when we served. We absolutely recognised that the Queen is the figure that we take our allegiance to, and her role has been so important to the military over so long. And I think generation after generation inherit the traditions and the customs and the pageantry, certainly for the Foot Guards and the Guards Division who have done so wonderfully today already, and it is passed down from one generation to the next. And of course, those that then leave, and there are of course many more veterans than there are those who are serving, remember their time in the armed forces, remember their links with our royal family, and have always got huge respect and are always very grateful for their interest and their support, even when they've left, our veterans.
And so, sadly, you as a charity, you have lost your patron, but presumably in no doubt that you will always have the support and the love of members of the royal family. And do you know what happens now in terms of the patronage of your charity?
Well, of course, we hope all that you've just said will continue to apply, and I'm certain it will. But we will, of course, now wait news from the King to understand whether he will take on the patronage from his mother. We hope he does, of course, but we will do nothing until we hear formally from his office and from the palace.
Lieutenant General James Bashall, very many thanks for your time. Thank you so much. National President of the Royal British Legion. Her Majesty the Queen, of course, was patron of the Royal British Legion. Let's return to the heart of central London, to Westminster Hall, as members of the public continue to file past the Queen's coffin to pay their last respects. The doors opened to the public at 5 o'clock, so these are some of the very first people to be able to come through. The predictions, as you may be aware by now, is that many hundreds of thousands of people will want to pay their respects, and certainly the Queen is lying in state for 4 days, and that queue will operate around the clock. It's a huge logistical operation, of course, as well as being something that's important, very, very moving to witness, but logistics are an important part of making this work, and one of the many challenges, inevitably, of the coming days is policing. Forces up and down the country, and particularly in the capital, will have had to prepare in advance. They're having to coordinate to make sure all these major events take place safely. 4 days of lying in state, and then the build-up to the funeral, the Queen's funeral on Monday, of course. We have seen the arrest of a number of anti-monarchy protesters. That has led to expressions of concern in some quarters. There have been people, human rights campaigners, some politicians, commentators criticising that, criticising what they see as a crackdown on free speech. So let's just talk about all the many challenges of the days ahead as so many people flood into London for these unparalleled events. Bob Broadhurst is with me here in the studio. Thank you so much for joining us. You are I believe, tell me, I hope I've got this right, a former Metropolitan Police Commander?
I am. I was Commander Public Order.
Indeed, and I know you've worked on a huge number of large-scale public events, particularly, for example, things like the London 2012 Olympics, events which went off so beautifully, but an enormous logistical challenge there. I'm interested, as we look at these pictures from Westminster Hall, what are your thoughts about the challenge facing the Met and presumably forces beyond today and in the coming days?
Well, undoubtedly, this will be the largest security operation this country has ever seen. It's a funeral. We must never lose sight of that.
Yes.
There's a grieving family, a grieving country. It's also a ceremony, a sombre but important ceremony, and it's a security operation. And ceremony and security are not happy bedfellows. A massive operation, we understand 10,000 officers a day, roughly the same as we had in the Olympics. The challenges will be, first of all, terrorism. You must always look at that. And I'm not talking here state-sponsored, I'm talking potentially lone individuals. So they'll be looking at that. That needs to be factored out. You're going to have almost all of the world's leaders or their representatives. They all are entitled to close protection, firearms protection. We have to manage that. The police have to manage that somehow and keep those people safe. You're going to have the potential for public order, protest. Protests will be allowed, and they have been allowed. There have been some arrests, but we can't comment on individual arrests. But you have to factor in and allow and facilitate protest, but within reason. We have to look about other people there.
Yes, and that's a judgment call in itself, isn't it? The context, the circumstances. It's difficult managing all of that. I mean, I think when people watch the images from this afternoon and the ceremony, as you say, the formal procession from the King, all the senior members of the royal family. I mean, it is extraordinary, and presumably it is an absolute credit to the security services thus far that we can have that we Absolutely. Can have the King and the heir to the throne and other senior members of the royal family walking through the streets of London. Behind, we see the pictures of it now, a 40-minute walk through the streets of London. I mean, that is extraordinary, perhaps, to some people watching, that can even be done.
I don't think there's another major country in the world that would allow that to happen, or it could happen. And it's testimony, as you say, to all those agencies. It's also testimony to the British public, because there is a contract here between the police and the public. The public are policing themselves. And
that, what we witness here, that's about intelligence.
It's about intelligence. Intelligence drives all these operations. They will be driving now where the police officers are and what they're doing. But essentially, this is community policing on a large scale. What you're seeing on the ground are police officers owning a small part of that crowd, getting to talk to that crowd and buying into that contract. That collectively is helping them keep safe.
And so when you talk about public order, for example, our focus for the next few days is on the Queen's lying in state. We've been talking so much about the queue is very nearly 3 miles long already, snaking through the capital, predicted to get longer, may well get longer. You've got people standing there, perhaps nice weather at the moment, might be very bad weather over the course of the next 4 days. You're managing a lot of different things there, people's own disquiet as well as the risk, God forbid, of something, of someone malicious with malicious intent.
Absolutely.
And I mean, it blows my mind. I'm putting it in layman's language, but I wonder, I suppose the Met has been preparing for this, hasn't it?
It's preparing for this, but on a smaller scale, the Met does this all the time. And they're the best in the world at doing it. There will be a plan, there'll be a goal commander, there'll be an overall strategy. This is what I want to happen. There'll be a tactical plan. This is how it's going to happen. The key is those sergeants and those 6 constables on the ground owning that plan, knowing what they've got to do.
And it's about communication. It's about comms and
it's talking to the public.
And maintaining good relations. There's Absolutely. No reason there shouldn't be good relations, no. But it's about a relationship.
It's a relationship, and it's about working together. The police are there with eyes and ears to look out for things that shouldn't be happening, and the public will buy into that and help them.
I'm only going to pause you, Bob Broadhurst, just to explain what we're seeing here, the changing of the guard around the coffin, around the catafalque. And this, I am told, is in fact going to happen every 20 minutes, which is a remarkable logistical operation in itself, given that what we're looking at here is really just the beginning. The doors have been open to the public for barely 3/4 of an hour, and the lying in state continues until 6:30 on Monday morning. 6:30 on the morning of the Queen's funeral, the state funeral. You can just see the members of the public who've been queuing held there while that brief ceremony, if we call it that, forgive me if that's the incorrect terminology, but while that changeover takes place, and now again people paying their respects, and still a slight pause is what a lot of people are choosing to do, a bow of the head, and just the stillness and the quiet inside Westminster Hall, despite the numbers of people who are coming through. And this is a scene that we will continue to watch now for 4 days. And a lady blows a kiss as she moves away. And let's just take a look at some of our cameras outside. Various vantage points. We have cameras along there. You see Lambeth Bridge, various points. And as we say, the queue currently at around about 3 miles long. The maximum, we are told, that the queue is going to be allowed to reach is 10 miles. A staggering thought when you think about it. It's about 3 miles at the moment, apparently. The absolute maximum is 10 miles, which would take the queue back sort of towards Bermondsey Tube Station, if you know London, snaking all the way along the South Bank. And Bob Broadhurst, as a former Metropolitan Police Commander, as someone with huge experience of policing large events, I suppose that's one of the reasons you're saying this is the biggest event, certainly in our lifetime. The notion of trying to keep everyone safe and happy over 10 miles, I mean, that's an eye-watering prospect.
Absolutely. This will be the biggest outpouring of people onto the streets of London we've ever seen. And of course, people bring crime. There will be criminals out there. They have to be managed. You know, the life of London goes on around this as well. London doesn't just stop. So the police have a huge operation on their hands. And
actually, I've heard authorities saying, you know, we're concerned, or we're aware that London will be full. I mean, that as a statement is so striking. I mean, it was very, very busy, obviously, during the London 2012 Olympics. It was a fantastic time. But we know that bluntly, a lot of Londoners left during that period because they thought it would be a bit overcrowded. They thought the tubes wouldn't be able to cope. I mean, in the end, it was terrific, but there was a slight anxiety. And I suppose London Transport Police is involved in all of this as well, because these people are getting on tubes, buses, trains. It's going to be packed. It's going to be cosy underground, isn't it?
It's going to be more than cosy. And indeed, the Transport Police and the other agencies, they have a huge role to play. And when they say London is full, they don't clearly mean that every metre is taken up. They mean indeed, key parts of London, unless you have to come to, please stay away, or go further away and come in from the outside. Don't pop up at Westminster. It's just going to be crowded. And that's just adding to the problems.
And so I suppose there are plans for, you talked about the importance of communication, there are plans for holding people back if somewhere gets too busy. In fact, I was in Green Park yesterday, close to Buckingham Palace, of course, and just at points you could see, and I wouldn't have described Green Park as particularly full at that point, but it was busy, but not rammed. But you could see where the stewards were just asking people to pause from time to time. And I suppose that's about managing crowds. Crushing. You want people to be well. You don't want people to be crushed. It's that sort of thing, I suppose.
Absolutely. Crowds in themselves are dangerous. You mentioned the weather. If we have a thunderstorm and suddenly everybody bolts for the same exit, that is potentially hugely dangerous. So there is a plan. There will be a plan to manage the crowds, and they will actually use the parks as overflows. Hyde Park, we know once Green Park and St James's are full, they'll move people towards Hyde Park, put big screens up. So there are tried and tested ways of managing this that you'll now see starting to swing into action.
Very, very interesting to talk to you. Thank you so much. Bob Broadhurst, good of you to give us our time. Thank you very much indeed, former Metropolitan Police Commander. And we may be talking again, of course, in the coming days, because 4 days ahead. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you. People continue to file through at Westminster Hall, and this is what we're going to be watching now, isn't it, for 4 days. People of all ages paying their respects. I think that's one of the things you notice, people of different ages, and we know that people have come from far and wide for this moment to pay their respects, perhaps to say thank you, just to stand at the Queen's coffin with their own thoughts. And we'll stay with these images. There's something still very, very touching and moving. And every person there will have their own reason for wanting to be there. How many people are thinking about their own loved ones, remembering loved ones, perhaps thinking about people they've lost, in particular during the pandemic, such a very difficult couple of years that the country has come through. And now the country with a king for the first time in 70 years. Our diplomatic correspondent James Landale is watching these images with me. It's incredibly moving just watching this. Whatever the reasons people might have had for queuing for hours, for then pausing, nodding, some mouthing thank you, a sign of the cross, some people in tears. Very, very moving to think about why people have chosen to come to the capital to pay their respects, James.
There's a technical term in the planning for this, which is called dwell time, which refers to the period of time that members of the public will take just to pause and pay their respects, do what they've just been doing. And it's going to be interesting to see how that's managed, because some people will want to take a little longer than others and queues will build up. And I think we're going to see a real tension at times between the logistics of this exercise, which are enormous, but also, you know, just the actual significance for each individual about why they're there and what they're doing it for. And I think managing that will be quite a challenge for the authorities.
Yes, and it puts us in mind of the lying in state in Edinburgh at St Giles Cathedral. Again, equally moving to watch. But, and we know around about 26,000 people passed through St Giles's. But I was struck watching those images from Edinburgh of how much more sparse the crowd looked by definition, but therefore how long some people were able to stand and just to silently stand and reflect and pay their respects. And they had the chance, the ability to do that, because there wasn't the pressure of numbers that we are inevitably going to see here in the capital. It was quite a different sense.
Yeah. There will be more people who wish to go past than are able to go past before the funeral. That is an inevitable truth of this. There are only so many people who can get past at a certain period of time, and so some people will come and will be disappointed. But I think that is inevitable, and it will just have to be managed as best it can. And the rest of us will just have to watch these extraordinary pictures in this extraordinary building. My favourite building in the whole of the Palace of Westminster. I spent much of my career working there.
Of course, you were a political correspondent. You're well used to
every day as I walked through, it lifts the heart, it lifts the spirit. It's the most extraordinary space, not just for its history, which and you know you can almost touch the history. You know, this was a place where, you know, it's a very royal palace. This is where royal parties used to take place. This is where coronation banquets would happen. This is where Anne Boleyn threw parties. But at the same time, this is where also a monarch was tried and found guilty of tyranny and condemned to death. This is where Charles I was tried. You know, for many years, these were the law courts. And so the extraordinary history that just drips off the walls is being added to today by what is, in historical terms, a relatively modern phenomenon. This idea of passing the monarch, it only dates back to 1910, which, you know, in historical terms is a blink of an eye. But as ever, what we're seeing this week is what we've constantly seen for many years, which is that the ability of royalty, of the British state, to adapt and reform and reinvent tradition. We're seeing that happening this week, the televising of previously private events, the opening up of a small window onto things that previously we would not have seen, is all part of that process of recreating tradition in a modern way so that it responds to contemporary needs.
James, thank you for now. James Landale. And let's return to the queue outside Westminster Hall, well, some distance away. Let's head to our correspondent, Zoe Conway. Zoe, you are, I think, at Albert Embankment. So explain what you're seeing, what people are saying to you as they pass.
Well, this queue is now moving at some pace. In fact, you might well see behind me there's some quite big gaps opening up as people are struggling to kind of keep up with the pace of this queue. But that's not to say that this queue isn't long. At the moment, it's measuring about 2.6 miles long and stretches all the way back several bridges east of here from here to London Bridge. And what they're going to be, they're all wearing wristbands. There's a lot of security around here. They're going to be crossing Lambeth Bridge. And once they get to the other side of the river, there's going to be airport-style security. There is a lot of security around here. Not long ago, I saw armed police in a boat keeping an eye on everything. There are the army's on the streets, as well as the police. And of course, everybody's here for their own personal reason. I was speaking to a man. He was in civilian clothes, but in fact, he'd been a soldier. He'd served in Afghanistan. He was wearing his medals. And he said that he wanted to pay his respect to the Queen, who he had served as a soldier. What's also notable is when you talk to people about the mood in the queue, it's been incredibly good-natured. There's a lot of camaraderie. Most of the people behind me will have joined the queue at about 1 o'clock this afternoon. But when you ask people to think about what it's going to be like to step into Westminster Hall, that's when people start to get quite emotional, when they start imagining what that moment is going to be like for them. I was talking to an 85-year-old man who was at the coronation 70 years ago as a 16-year-old, and he started welling up when he imagined what it was going to be like to be in that extraordinary place.
Yes, that is very, very striking, and we can see from our pictures inside that it is indeed proving a very moving experience for an awful lot of people coming through. Thank you, Zoe. I know you'll be there to talk to others as they continue to queue. We've already heard of people making friends in the queue. You are there standing next to people you don't know for a very, very long time, so there will be friendships struck up. But let's just stay for our last few moments with the pictures from inside Westminster Hall as we watch people of all ages, all the generations, from all over the country, probably fair to guess from all over the world, starting to make their way and paying their final respects to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. And this is something we will return to over the coming days. The people who first came through those doors at 5 o'clock started queuing at about 8 o'clock this morning. And we will stay with these images here from inside Westminster Hall at the lying in state of Her Majesty the Queen.